before going to the design, or any other priority stuff there is, because maybe code freeze in a couple of days, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so we can start with other tasks and have a cutoff that by 10:30 we'll start the design review.
Okay.
Okay, so especially for
question about the recordings. I assume someone's got them somewhere, but I don't see any links in the notes here to them. Does anyone know where the recordings are?
Yeah, it should be accessible from, there's a main Kubernetes, I don't know what it's called, YouTube channel, a YouTube folder, and all the working groups are there.
Oh, okay, great. Maybe we can stick a link to them in these notes. Sounds good.
So, Christian, can I add a to-do for you to add a link?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Let's start with 1.7 tasks. Is there anyone who's blogged on anything? Review or design?
Yeah, this is Deepak. So Janu is there on the call. So Janu, you want to talk about I think the resource issues you were running into as part of your end-to-end testing. Janu, you're on mute. Yeah. Hello?
Hello?
Hey, Janu, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I can maybe tell. I think the issue he probably was running into was the batch APIs need to be enabled, one. And what he was trying to do was probably enable it outright. Like there is a separation between rest of the APIs and the APIs which we sort of consider alpha in Federation. So batch APIs and the autoscaler APIs are considered alpha, and they are not enabled by default. So I think he was running E2E test without that and trying to enable them directly. I'm not sure what is
Irfan, I thought I talked to him on Friday actually. He mentioned that he fixed that, but he was running into some other resource not being available issue. Resource meaning load balancer or something, some other resources in the GCE environment. That's what he was saying. Hey, Janu, you there?
Yeah, last week there was one GCE E2E etcd test which was failing multiple times. It did fail for me also a couple of times, but the last run I did run, it was sort of successful. So maybe he hit a flake. So one more thing I saw, which is updated in his PR, is that he sort of updated the deployment, the KubeFed deployment, or the E2E deployment using etcd3. Currently, KubeFed uses that, and in Federation now we explicitly set a flag as the API server backend to be etcd2, not etcd3. So I don't know why he's doing that.
He replied that to your comment this morning. Did you see that? Just this morning, just before the meeting.
Oh, I did not see that.
Just 5 minutes ago. Yeah.
I'll check that. Yeah, and the point is that at least one of the approvers should take a look on that PR and maybe put an approve over there, or say that there is a problem. Correct? Because I didn't see any activity on that since quite a long time.
Is this the implementation for the federated jobs?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I can approve that if it's been reviewed. I'll do that today.
Yeah, last time I saw that it was assigned to Quinton and he had a few comments, and I saw these comments from Irfan as well that he should only enable it in E2E test and shouldn't change the HCD version, which I agree. And I guess he was just waiting for the tests to be passing. Like the tests are were failing last time I checked. Yeah.
Just
I think
clarify something.
Yeah, go ahead, Quinton. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to want to clarify something about alpha versus beta, etc. My understanding is that almost everything is alpha at the moment, and I don't recall us disabling alpha features in Federation by default. Did something change somewhere along the line, or am I confused?
Yeah, so for
No,
1.6,
what? Okay.
yeah, for 1.6, we
Go
had
ahead,
the code for those APIs were added to Federation, like jobs and batch and auto scaling, those two group versions, but we didn't have the controllers that were merged. So we had to disable those APIs. And so that's how we are disabling APIs which are not fully working right now. They're disabled by default. And once
Okay,
we
so
have
it's
the
not-
implementation, we
Okay,
can
I
enable them.
understand. So it's not alpha APIs, it's APIs without controllers.
We do want to disable alpha APIs as well, where we are defining alpha as like which are relatively new and haven't been tested, but others such as services or ingress which have been there longer and we have more confidence in them, we can enable them by default, but disable all the alpha APIs by default.
But hold on, we're getting into terminology complications
Yeah.
in here.
Yes.
Alpha
Yes.
means that the API is not finalized yet, which means that everything that is using annotations at the moment is alpha. And in fact, I would argue that almost everything in the Federation API is technically alpha.
Well, there's a slight,
Bunches.
sorry, the indication that something's alpha because it's using annotations is primarily for resources that are managing their own data. And so it's kind of a bit of a gray area for Federation because we're kind of managing our own data, but it's not like first class. We're not, if I'm a replica set and there's an annotation that I'm using as a replica set, that's a problem for me to be like something other than alpha. But if I'm Federation and I'm storing some data and I'm not actually managing, I'm not responsible for replica set, I'm just using it, then it's okay. It's not good because of the backwards compatibility and validation issues, but it doesn't have the same implication, if that makes sense.
I still don't fully understand. So once we commit to an API and we say that it's not going to change anymore and we're going to be backwards compatible, then it switches from alpha to beta. And until that's the case, it's alpha.
So there's the API. There's the API, but there's also the implementation. Like users expect that if they bring up Federation and this API is enabled and they can create those resources, they expect that it's all working fine. And like I said, in 1.6, we had those APIs, but we didn't have the controller at all. So like we want to disable the APIs until they are fully implemented.
Yes, that I understand, but that's different than disabling all the alpha APIs. And it's also different than calling the things that are alpha, which have not got finalized APIs, just calling them beta. So I just want to make sure we're all talking the same lingo here.
So there's alpha APIs and there are alpha features where like the features haven't been implemented fully.
Yes, so if they're alpha APIs, but they have a working controller, then they are enabled by default. Is that correct?
It depends on definition of like working controller. Is it satisfactory or like it has good tests and we have confidence that we can enable it by default?
We have a precedent
We
for this.
can say so far. We can say so far this is correct. Quentin's statement is correct. So only job and HPI are the controllers, which actually does not exist as of now until any of the PRs are merged. So this statement will hold correct.
Okay.
And I have one more pointer to add to one more maybe issue, which I think as an issue, maybe not an issue. But currently in APIs, the paths that we use and the names that we use are sort of borrowed or picked up from the Kubernetes APIs itself. So as far as I understand, the API path itself depicts in what phase or what is it currently. For example, in Kubernetes, the replica set APIs have v1 beta 1 and they might have a v1 also. In Federation, we are always since the beginning when replica set was enabled in Federation, it always was v1 beta 1 and still exists to be v1 beta 1. What I understand is that API, if it is an alpha, it depicts in the paths. That is the correct way of doing it, right? So there is no separation in Federation because as of now, as if Quentin mentioned, all the APIs are alpha.
I mean, well, there is no separation in the reference docs that we expose, but every time we make a release, we explicitly say what the maturity level of the API is in the release node, right? So yes, there isn't in the kind or a group version that people specify in the YAML files, but we do say that this API is alpha, use at your own caution, right?
Yeah, but it sounds like a little bit of a misplaced thing, right?
Oh
I mean,
yeah,
at least
of course.
that way.
Yeah, we all agree that.
Yep.
We all agree that.
Yeah, this is not an ideal, it's a little bit of a wart for us because it definitely leads to confusion with people.
Yeah.
And people are confused about, this is beta, why is it not beta? It's like, but this has been annoying.
But is
Yeah,
this
and
specific to sorry, I'm kind of catching up here, but I don't think this is specific to Federation. I believe that we have alpha features in Kubernetes that are not under alpha in the API path. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That was true many releases ago. Things have become much better now. People do put alpha things in alpha. But what you are saying is deployments and replica sets were both in the state that you are mentioning now. But that was in 1.2, that was like 5 releases ago. But since then, we have gotten a lot better with group versioning things, and alpha APIs do go to alpha paths now in Kubernetes.
Also, I think our problem is categorically different because Kubernetes' problem was they were sloppy about putting things in alpha. Our problem is in Kubernetes, it's beta, but we're not in beta. So we have a real mismatch, whereas it's not just a like, oh, if we were better about our bookkeeping, it would work. We have legitimate like different bookkeeping, where in Kubernetes, a resource is in beta and base Kubernetes, and for us, it's in alpha, which is a different problem.
Yeah, and it wasn't actually a problem in the past because there was no such thing as an alpha path. You just decided that something was either alpha or beta in the release notes, but the path was always neither alpha nor beta, even for things that were technically alpha and beta in Kubernetes. So there was no mismatch. But now it seems that by Kubernetes cleaning up their act and actually pushing things through alpha and beta and release, we need to do the same. But then this additional complication has arisen, which is that they might be in beta or release and we might be in alpha. Is anybody here very well? The reason I'm belaboring this point a little bit is I think it's a bit of a problem, or big problem actually. So we need to maybe schedule a separate discussion to sort it out. Is anyone well plugged in with the API group at the moment? Is any, like the API SIG? I haven't been to one of their meetings for quite some time.
I haven't been to the meetings, but I'm subscribed to the mailing list. So I do get some updates.
Okay. Now, the reason I'm asking is I'm curious how they, so if people build, applications based on, for example, beta, which technically has a finalized API, then as soon as that thing gets released, all of those applications are going to break when the API moves from the beta URL path to the released URL path, the V1 or whatever it is. So I'm curious, and we sort of have a similar-ish problem, which is that the Kubernetes applications that work against Kubernetes will not work against Federation because we deem something to be alpha, for example, even though, yeah.
So in Kubernetes, they do, whenever they move from beta to GA, they support both the parts for
releases, I think.
For some releases, yeah. So when they move, you can send it to, like if they move deployments to somewhere else, you can still send it to extensions v1 beta 1 deployments or like apps v1 deployments.
Yeah, and this is happening right now. Deployments and replica sets have been moved from extension/v1 beta 1 to apps/v1 beta 1 as a part towards taking them to GA. And if you're using Kubernetes today, 1.6, you can send your deployments to both extensions and apps. And that will be true that'll be true in the near future, at least a couple of releases, I think. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Sounds like we might need to do something similar, but even more confusing, which is to support the Kubernetes version in Federation, because we sort of go through multiple beta phases. We go through the API in Kubernetes is already finalized and therefore beta, and we will support that. But then we also support additional extensions like these placement things and annotations and whatever else. And those then, are not finalized yet, and then they become beta, those extensions. So I guess we need to think this through a bit more carefully than we have, given the changes in Kubernetes API management, and fix it. Because I don't think I think we need to make sure that we do it correctly and document it properly and follow our own procedures. But maybe let's table that for the next meeting rather than spend too much time here now.
Yeah, but I did want to come back to which APIs should be disabled by default in Federation, or should we now as jobs controller is merged, should we enable it by default, or for one release we still keep it disabled and make sure we have enough confidence and then enable it in the next release?
No, I don't think we need to. I mean, provided that the thing has a controller and that the controller, works nominally. I mean, that's the definition of alpha, is an incomplete API and an unstable implementation.
But because we have this problem that we don't convey that it's alpha, from the path it seems beta or G or whatever. So in our case, we don't have that same flexibility as Kubernetes.
Well, we have up to now done that with release notes, and I don't think it's been a big problem. I mean, up to now, we've just enabled everything on the V1 API.
But that is because all of them were relatively new. Now, there is this maturity difference between resources that have been here for more than 2 releases and the ones that are going to be added just now.
I'm not quite sure I understand your argument. When we implemented federated replica sets, for example, they were V1 in Kubernetes, implemented the Kubernetes API. They were V1 in the Federation API on the URL path, but in the release notes, we said that we're still finalizing the API with respect to placement and the stuff which is currently in annotations.
Yeah.
So we via the release notes, we labeled it as alpha, but in the URL path, it was V1. So what I'm saying is, until we've come up with a well thought out, better plan for that, I think we should just carry on doing that.
I think Nikhil's point is that when there were fewer types, like when it was just starting and you added 1 type, 2 types, there's no real point in saying we're going to disable these 2 types because they're alpha. It was obvious that the whole entire thing was alpha. But now that there are several types that are somewhat more established and have been there longer, so if we say replica sets are more established and secrets and config maps are more, and big daemon sets are more established than jobs, because those exist and we have these different levels, disabling new controllers by default seems like a way to potentially tell the user, besides release notes, that this is an alpha feature, because not everything necessarily has the same level of confidence. I mean,
yeah, I can understand that argument now. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with it, and again, I think rather than do something on the spur of the moment here that is inconsistent with what we've done in the past, what I would prefer that we do is actually sit down and think the whole thing through properly, and then implement whatever that thing is. It just doesn't seem like we've given it enough due diligence to make a decision to change what we've been doing up to now. It seems a bit arbitrary to draw a distinction at the moment when we didn't in the past.
So this looks like one of the things on our design review. So I guess, is this worth hashing out now? It's one of the things on our agenda of design review for today, I think.
Oh, I just added it.
You just added it? Oh, okay. Okay. Never mind then. Sorry, Maru.
Yeah.
To say that I agree with Quentin. I mean, I'm not really participating in the API SIG so much, but when it comes to the issues around annotations and trying to move things to stability, I've been talking with Clayton Coleman, who is one of the core people in API, and he's definitely looking to see Federation sort of move away from the annotations-based approach, which is one of the motivations for some of the discussion that Nikhil is now leading. So yeah, I definitely would like to see, as Quentin says, like a targeted discussion around solving this problem so that we can be building on a solid foundation going forward.
Yeah. And just to be clear, the annotation stuff was always a temporary goal by design to get feedback on whether we, had the right ideas. And it's also implemented that way in Kubernetes. So when they, add tentative API fields and whatever in Kubernetes, they also do it via annotations initially, because it doesn't involve breaking API changes and enables us to get feedback on whether whether it works properly for people. And then it gets promoted to, once we have a better idea, it gets promoted to the API. So that wasn't just sloppiness on our part. That was actually following a well-defined process.
I apologize if I gave you the impression that I was assuming it was sloppiness. I think my concern was that there wasn't a path forward. So it's like, yes, you're experimenting, you're trying things out, but there's not actually a path defined to stability. And so that was kind of the reason for initiating that discussion.
Okay, cool. Makes sense. And admittedly, it is more complicated with Federation because we have some fields that we might want to add only for Federation and not for Kubernetes. And I don't think we've actually come to a conclusion as to how we deal with that in the general case either.
Yeah, it's still in progress. Hopefully that's something we can come to a conclusion on for 1.8.
Yeah.
Okay. Mother, do you want to give any E2E test status?
There is no update. Tests are all green. It's pretty much the same as last week, except that we still haven't managed to make pre-submits blocking again. Hopefully, we are going to do that today.
Cool.
They're super green though. They were green.
Wow.
This is the CI. I don't know how to send. I can send you. Like, can you open the link, Nikhil? If I send you.
No.
Okay.
If you ping on the chat, on this hangout.
On this chat.
Yeah.
Okay. I will send it to you in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, that greenness looks fantastic. Can anyone confirm whether that's true green? Or are those like disabled tests, or are they all actually running and actually passing?
Oh, the greens that you see are running tests.
Fantastic. Thank
There
you.
are disabled tests, but those aren't seen on the test grid.
So there are some tests which are disabled.
Okay, and how many of those are there roughly?
26, I think. The green ones are 26, 28, I forget the number, but something like that.
And how many disabled?
Well, we have one
There's
disabled
one
replica set
test.
test, and all the ingress tests are disabled. So yeah, that's it. 5 ingress tests, I think, and 1 replica set test. Right?
Cool. Is anybody working on getting those fixed and enabled again?
Well, once the replica set sync controller stuff goes in, I will be looking more at making sure the replica set tests work properly. Again, since the sync controller work is in progress, actually updating the current replica set controller and debugging it in an attempt to fix the test. That
makes sense.
Yeah.
And does the same apply to ingress, or because it seems like there are a whole bunch of disabled ingress tests?
Yes, I have a fix for ingress failures. I haven't had time to actually test them at the scale I wanted to test them, but yeah, I'm working on fixing them.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I think most of those were passing at one point, other than that one bug that Christian fixed. I don't know if other bugs were found, but they were certainly passing at some point during the bug that Christian fixed. Okay, cool. Sounds good.
Is Colin here, or does someone have an update on AWS tests?
Can you pin me?
I don't think Colin is
I don't
here.
see Colin.
Okay.
Can you pin me?
Pin you, sorry. I said ping.
And I added this PR in the list of open PRs. I just wanted to request if there's anyone else who can review this. I reviewed it, but I reviewed the design proposal as well. So it'd be great if someone else can take a look at this as well. This is Torrance PR for policy-based placement. So maybe Quentin, if you can take a look, or if anyone else, it would be great to have some other person apart from me who also takes a look at this. Yeah.
Sorry, you broke up. Apart from you or apart from me?
Apart from me. So I reviewed the design as well, and I reviewed the code as well. It would be great if someone else can also take a look at the PR.
Okay, I'm pretty sure I've reviewed that PR a long time ago, but I'll have another look.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the state of pre-submit tests. The REDs that you see are not our problem. They are basically people pushing code that doesn't actually build. So ignoring those REDs, we are super green.
Beautiful.
That's it.
And they're running pretty quickly. It looks like 40 minutes.
They actually only take 20 minutes. This is the reporting problem in the test infra side. So sometimes it actually takes longer, but usually it's the reporting problem. They run much faster.
Cool.
Awesome. So we are at 10:30 mark, and we should start the design review for stateful sets.
Cool.
Yeah, Irfan.
Yep. You want me to present, or you can just open that? Yeah, you can open the file. So I believe some people would have read it through. I did some updates recently, but that was like just some more additional implementation detail. So
I guess
I can give I can give a very brief overview. Like of there are two alternatives suggested over here, but the proposal or the alternative which we are saying is good to go or would be taken is the case where when a user creates a stateful set in Federation, it will be sort of partitioned into the underlying clusters, something similar to what replica set does. So say a user submits a stateful set with 5 replicas, and you have 2 clusters. One cluster gets 3 replicas, another cluster gets 2 replicas. And that additional to that, the user also creates the governing service domain that is using a headless service, which needs to be created in Federation. The same service will be created in underlying clusters. And with this much alone, there will be 2 stateful sets in 2 clusters, and the replicas reachable within the clusters alone, because that much is taken care by the headless service and the stateful pods that are created within a cluster. Additional to that, what I'm suggesting is that each pod can have multiple DNS identities. So currently, using the headless service, there is one identity a pod gets. If you scroll down later, lower, Nikhil, then maybe there is some DNS names and all, where you can, yeah, something like this. So additional DNS identities, when this much happens, after that, the controller, the Federation controller will create, and that too, if it is sort of chosen by the user, either by specification or as a notation, saying that we need public discovery also. Then LB service, a load balancer service against each stateful pod is created inside the clusters. So there will be one more DNS identity which can be discovered by the stateful pods, or can be externally reachable by other users also. So this is mainly the gist of it.
Can I just ask a clarifying question, Irfan, and this might help other people as well. My understanding is that the intention is that there are essentially 2 primary use cases. The one is that a user wants to deploy an application into multiple clusters, and in each cluster there needs to be something like a quorum. A typical use case might be an etcd of 3 nodes in every cluster, and that is catered for by this. And you can make sure that you get exactly 3 in each cluster by using min and max in the placement preferences. And then the other use case is you want to create a something like a quorum or a stateful set across multiple clusters. For example, you have 5 clusters and you want one etcd instance in each cluster, and they should all be able to find each other and create a quorum that way. And that's what the external DNS entry and headless services are for. Is that correct?
Yes. So the headless service, and so what Quinton was mentioning is I did not state the 2 use cases which I have specified here. So the 2 use cases are, one use case is that you have multiple clusters, multiple federated clusters, and you have some application which probably wants deployment as smaller local Quora. For example, in 3 clusters, you deploy an application which wants to form a quorum in cluster number 1 also, cluster number 2, and cluster number 3, all separately. And maybe periodically they want to reach through only one, or they have some other mechanism of reaching across. So this is one use case which can be solved directly by creating a headless service in the local cluster and giving the desired replicas for the stateful set in that local cluster. The second use case is that either with the local Quora, either the same pods or same stateful pods want to ensure that they can communicate across the clusters also. For example, in this the example that we gave, which is 333. So there is a bigger quorum which needs to be formed of all 9 stateful pods also, or it could be only the local quorum is not required. The application wants only a global quorum where maybe 1 replica per cluster is desired, and those replicas should be able to reach each other and discover each other across the clusters in a federated way per se. So both these are the 2 use cases that we are trying to present, which can be solved with this design. And the local quorum is solvable just by creating the headless service and stateful set, and using the way stateful sets work in the local clusters. The global one is by adding on an LB, a load balancer service per pod, per stateful pod, which is controlled, created, and the DNS entry is also controlled by the federated controller.
So by default, do we create the global DNS rules and the load balancer service as well, or is there a switch that user explicitly says, I want these?
I have specified the default way as it will be created, but user can turn it off, or it could be the other way around also if everybody thinks that's better.
So how does the user turn it off?
Using an annotation again. I mean, I don't have a direct way as an API or something which can be specified. Means while creating the stateful set, preferences needs to be specified. I haven't given the exact details of preferences over here, but I think that probably needs to go in the document once the feature is done.
So maybe I just am missing it, but is there any mention in the doc about if you're exposing pods with services, like the implications security-wise? Because, I mean, essentially you can't have a private federated stateful set then. Or like you can't necessarily control access to it, or is the anticipation you're going to use something like network policy to control ingress to those pods?
See, actually, this is the design that is proposed here. It is more or less sort of using the features which are there, and we just make the federated controllers not much feature rich and all that stuff. The best way of doing this probably is having a CNI network across, an overlay network across clusters. That is what I think is the best way of doing it, and it probably can take care of the security concern that you mentioned as of now. So we have some overlay networks in Kubernetes cluster itself, which maintain the network across the nodes within a cluster. That if some of the CNIs can support extending it across the clusters among the federated clusters, that would be the best solution according to me. But so, as far as the security concern, exposing a service is concerned, the services, when they are created, the user can choose that they are created or exposed on HTTPS or HTTP. So how much ever that secure TLS or HTTPS transfer provides security, that much is the security of these communication across.
Sure. I'm thinking of, stateful sets typically being data centric and not necessarily, facing the public.
There will be some.
So generally you want to avoid like being able to have denial of service attacks against those services anyway.
I can, sorry, were you finished? I was just going to add a comment that there's a general requirement for secure exposure of services between Kubernetes clusters. And this has kind of been on our roadmap for quite a few quarters now. I think we called it.
Sorry, whose roadmap?
On the Federation roadmap. And maybe it actually applies outside of Federation, but certainly there's been a requirement expressed by customers and brainstormed by ourselves for how do we expose things between multiple federated clusters in a secure way. So they're not just out on the internet, but they're somehow visible to other clusters in the Federation. And I think that problem and the solution to that problem extends beyond stateful sets. And I would propose that we solve that general problem and then apply the solution to stateful sets as well. So one way of doing that would, for example, be to have an explicit option for the type of stateful set in this particular case, which is explicitly, publicly visible nodes or whatever. And that's the only type supported now. And then in the future, when we have, private services between clusters, we can have another type which says, no, I don't want my stuff public, I want it private. I'm waving my hands a bit, but approximately like that. And yes, unfortunately, right now, if you're uncomfortable with the security aspects of exposing services via HTTPS or whatever endpoints, then you shouldn't use this feature. And that's essentially the same, for Kubernetes in general. There's no good way to do what you're wanting to do.
Well, but I mean, in the case of Kubernetes in an individual cluster, I have the option of having essentially private services, whereas, I just don't do a load balancer type. I do something that has a cluster IP. And if you're doing it across clusters, as you say, that's just not an option.
Well, so you have that option now as well. You can not expose your
I'm saying there's no way to have private, like there's no way to have, like if it's cross-cluster, it's inherently going to be public today without any sort of overlay or tunneling or anything like that. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, yes, that's true. That's true for services at the moment, and it will be true for these stateful sets, and it is true for Kubernetes as well. If you want to access things in one cluster from things in another cluster, you have no option but to expose them by public load balancers at the moment today.
So beyond the technical details, I'm a little bit concerned at the sort of the lack of detail of the use cases. There's a lot of, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it this way and I'm going to do it for these reasons, and yet I don't see a foundation like justification for doing a lot of these things. And I think it would be helpful to actually flesh out those use cases so that, someone like me who's, relatively fresh to the design would have some sort of basis for deciding whether something is a good idea or not, or a good way to solve a problem or not. Because right now it sounds like, it reads to me like a solution, but I don't really have a good sense of the question that it's answering.
Yeah, actually, there is one comment which Quinton gave earlier, who is about listing. As you mentioned, I have given 2 abstract use cases as of now, but not listing, say, a real-world application which use case which can depict that this is how it can be used and this is what is the need. Probably, I'll add that also.
But so those. Great. 2 use cases, there's a section called use cases near the top of the document. And it outlines 2 specific use cases and why they are important.
I'm not sure that I would describe those as particularly specific though. They're kind of like, I'd like to do something because something, but like, maybe that makes sense to you because you have background, but like, would you go seriously out and implement something based on, you know, a sentence of a requirement? Like, it seems a little thin to me.
So
Sure.
what I understand.
I'm just trying to make sure that I understand what it is that you want fleshed out. So take use case number 1, for example. And I just want to get crisp and understand. I don't want to go and make changes that don't address the question that you're asking. So a stateful app, for reasons of high availability, wants the stateful pods distributed in different clusters such that the set can withstand cluster failures. This represents an application with one single global quorum. So is that not clear what the requirement is there?
I guess I'm kind of curious, like what kind of application are we talking about? I mean, it's a little bit, I get it, it's abstract, but like, why would an application need that?
So you want some examples?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to have concrete examples.
Okay, so that's something we can.
Right. What I was going to add is like, does it even make sense to do cross-regional quorum?
This is not cross-regional, by the way. This is cross-cluster.
Okay, but
I mean, that's not clear in the documentation. Any user who would read this documentation would think that this would support cross-regional quorum just because there is word single global quorum there. There is nothing in the doc that actually says anything against that.
right. I mean, so you could say that I'll deploy a cluster in a separate rack, and all those racks are in a data center, and you have HA in that data center. But typically, I don't think that's why people come to Federation, especially if you contrast this with something like Ingress, which is clearly cross-regional. And so that's use case number 1. And if I read correctly, use case number 2 is just restating what we do to every single resource in Federation. It's basically a replication.
Well, not every single. So services and ingress and deployments, maybe not deployment, services and ingress in particular are more than just, doing the same thing in multiple clusters.
Well, in the abstract form, I mean, it's just the CRUD in every cluster.
That's what I'm saying. So stateful sets, services, and ingress will all be exceptions to what you just said. And the second use case, I guess, is not one of those. Yes, the second use case is the simplest form of federation.
Yeah. So would actual example, for example, something supporting use case 1 could be that a user wants to deploy etcd quorum across 3 federated clusters with one etcd replica in each cluster, such that if there is a cluster failure, then also this quorum can continue working. So something like this is what I understand you are looking for, Maru, Christian, or something else.
Well, I guess clearly we have some use cases in the of the stateless variety, but I haven't heard of any customers just coming to us and say, we're really missing this feature out of Federation, and we need stateful apps to function over this particular controller. It seems people are doing stateful things outside of Kubernetes. Using applications and their own notion of what it means for HA, but I'm not sure that necessarily always fits squarely over these 2 use cases.
I guess for these use cases, do they necessarily have to be conjoined? Like, could we consider, the simple case of I'm just gonna, replicate like deployments and replica sets, and then separately consider how you would create, like have the option of creating global quorum or cross-cluster quorum? Because they kind of seem, I don't know, they seem orthogonal to me. Is that not the case?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Sorry, Irfan, carry on.
Yeah, I did not completely get you. You are saying that using the replica sets, maybe this feature something like on top of replica sets or something like
Sorry,
that? Because you mentioned.
I didn't mean to confuse that. I just meant that like the approach of simply like scheduling stateful sets into individual clusters, not trying to do like cross-cluster like quorum. That maybe that's something that could be done like first, and then separately you could consider the possibility of doing global quorum. But like,
Okay, I get it.
it might be simpler to design a feature if those things are in fact orthogonal, and I suspect they are.
I have a more direct question. Because since you Huawei guys are implementing this, what is your use case?
Our say, for example, Huawei per se, the use cases that I did receive from internal teams was they have some databases, internal databases, which might, which can form a large size cluster quorum also. For example, 30 replicas or 40 replicas. And they are sort of capable of working in a smaller replica mode also. For example, 3 or 4 replicas can be local, and then one of them can communicate across. Out of this quorum, 3 or 4 replicas, one of them can communicate across to another such quorum of 3 or 4 replicas, and all of them can work as a distributed DB kind of a thing. That is one concrete use case which I did get from our internal teams, the database team.
Okay.
And I think there are some other DBs which can work in such large stateful forms also. I don't exactly have the names of them, or which might be. Apart from that, etcd I know is solving the same problem using operator. So this can provide a direct way of doing the same thing. Which etcd implements using etcd operator on top of KTS.
One other quick comment is that we have a very specific use case in Federation right here, building a highly available Federation API. Part of that is building an etcd quorum across multiple clusters so that the Federation API stays up if a cluster goes down. And the atypical way of doing that might be having 3 clusters in 3 availability zones in the same region.
What about taking something like Rethink DB and looking at how that could get deployed across Federation, since that's a CNCF project?
Yeah, I think there are many, many similar applications. And if what's missing here is concrete examples, I think it's perfectly reasonable we could go and add some. I'm not sure that it should necessarily, well, I think that would make the document more readable. And I personally can think of a bunch of them. We've talked about 2 or 3 right here. I'm just not sure that it should necessarily hold up the implementation, unless somebody thinks that there is unlikely to be a number of use cases for this, and we shouldn't build it therefore. Is that a concern? Or I totally buy Maru's question of can we deal with these 2 things independently, and I think yes we can. In the case of services, which is a very similar situation, we could have just simply replicated services across clusters, but in addition to that, we built cross-cluster service discovery, which was actually the super interesting thing from customers' points of view, because it gives you HA and all these other good things, which incidentally was identified as the sort of biggest use case, general use case for Federation was high availability, being able to tolerate the outage of a single cluster. Whereas a stateful set which does not span multiple clusters doesn't give you that. But I do agree that they can be designed and implemented somewhat independently of each other.
Yeah, from my perspective, we just haven't gone there. Even though we deal with multiple clusters, we don't put data in the clusters. So it's hard for me to say, but I would expect that the use cases are fairly limited right now if someone actually wanted to do this.
Right. So I guess to expand on your point, Quentin, I guess the document similar to what you just described is, here's the value add of cross-cluster service discovery, which everybody on the SIG, I think, appreciates. I think what we want to stare at, or at least I'd like to understand, is for stateful sets, what is the value add for implementing
Oops, you went dead there. Hello?
Yep, I think only Christian and team.
We lost somebody there.
Yep.
Is that the whole room that went dead?
Yeah, seems like.
Yeah, I mean, Google has a thing called Global Chubby, which is used extensively across Google for locks between data centers, etc. So, there's many of these use cases, but writing them down and being explicit about them seems like a good idea.
Yeah, I would do that. I like that.
I mean, Irfan, I don't personally think that necessarily needs to hold up your implementation, because we have internal use cases for it anyway. But yeah, let's expand the document slightly, justifying the use case.
Yep.
Sorry, we were disconnected for like 30 seconds.
Oh, we just
So we lost Christian. He was saying something.
It's Christian. You were in mid-sentence, I think.
Oh, right. So I was saying, just as I think everybody on the SIG appreciates what cross-cluster discovery brings to the table, in that it's not just services. I think that what we'd like to read out of this document would be pretty much that delta between, okay, we understand that we can replicate stateful sets in multiple clusters like we can with other objects, but if there is to be a value add, what is that delta and what are the use cases?
Yeah, while you were gone, I just made a comment that Google has a thing called Global Chubby, which is used extensively across Google by many, many applications for
Yes.
cross-cluster leader election and locking and all sorts of things. So, I mean, that's essentially the use case. It's all those cases where Global Chubby is used. But we can, and there are a bunch more. You can have multi-cluster, Cassandra clusters, etc. But yeah, I can work with Irfan, and we can flesh out some more, a longer list of concrete examples.
Right, but what I've come across for all these applications is that they're solving problems that are difficult enough that they end up using solutions that are pretty tailored and that are not, covered by a generic controller like this one.
I'm not quite sure I understand. Are you saying that the cases that we've mentioned so far would not work with this controller, or?
Well, it's not clear to me that chubby means stateful sets.
As in,
Chubby has a lot of logic beyond stateful sets to do what it can do in terms of being a global service.
I guess your fear is that without like specific motivating examples, we build a generic thing to do something that nobody quite wants to do. And everybody will need something specific enough for a use case that the generic thing we build doesn't prove useful for anyone. Is that what
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Sure.
Maybe I'm missing something even out of stateful sets, non-federated, but.
Agree. A more concrete example with a walkthrough of the existing constructs or EDMs proposed in the design doc would help.
Yeah.
Okay. That point is taken. Yep, that point is taken.
Okay,
So
I think we're out of time, guys. And I'm guessing you get kicked out of your room soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. Okay.
Do we want to have this thing, or Were there any other concerns about this design other than the use cases being unclear?
I guess we'll know when we have a more concrete use case, I guess, right?
Yeah,
I don't know at this point what to say because I don't know if everything is actually right other than the use cases. To me, I will know when I see the use case.
Yeah, I guess it's a little hard in the abstract to figure out whether the design is good or right. I mean, it's a design, but when there are use cases, it'll be easier to pin down what about the design doesn't seem to match the use cases for us.
Is that
Actually, one simple examples what might be there for concrete use cases is Quinton has put one comment. It's almost at the end of the PR. He has listed a couple of them. He mentioned from the top of his head, which he can think of, which I did not add so far. Thinking we'll first have a discussion and then I'll do that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, who's sharing? Nikhil, are you sharing? Can you just go to the PR last? Yeah, this one.
I see it. It's up. Oh, you're not pinned? Oh, you're pinned. Okay.
I just had one last question also to clarify before we wrap up, which is, did everyone actually get a chance to read the document? I mean, it's totally understandable if you didn't actually, before this meeting, read the document. And that's a different problem to solve than the document you tried hard and you couldn't understand it. So I would encourage people just to be very clear as to whether they read the document before the meeting or whether this is the first time they've really thought about it.
I have read the document.
I honestly have not read the document.
I have.
But okay, so I guess some have.
Also, I was kind of surprised this was on the agenda because it's not on the schedule.
Yeah.
So use the block in the schedule. It's one of the sheets on the Federation Engineering Roadmap.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. This was discussed in the last meeting that we'll discuss it the next
Okay.
one.
Yeah, but okay.
Okay, so better notification and you
Okay,
should,
we need to do that.
because it's not very easy to have a production discussion with people who have a chance to read it. Okay, cool. Well, hopefully we will for next time around.
Yep, next Tuesday at 9:30, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.